Now, there's a lot of people who will say that the things you leave out, the spots where you don't play, are at least or even more important than the places where you do play. So if that's the case, this lesson is going to be particularly important because we're going to talk about the idea of a rest. Now, a rest is a little bit different from holding a note. For example, if we have like a quarter note where we do one and it rings out. A rest is very different because we have one, and if we had a rest, we actually place a hand. There's a couple of different ways to do it. Usually it's done with the right hand, touch the strings, so you get nothing. Sometimes you'll get an accompanying pick stroke. Just kind of depends on how things go. You'll see more as we get into how this is used in the context of a song, but by and large, it's just going to be, placing my hand on the strings or possibly relaxing my left hand so that I get nothing. It'll mute out, but a rest simply means make your guitar stop making any sound so that, there's no sound coming out of it at all. Do whatever you got to do to stop it. Okay? So we have a few different types of rests, and they get various counts. We have a whole rest, which basically looks like a little bar, a little rectangle hanging down from the top, and it's very easy to play. It's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and there's really nothing you can do there. So if we put that together with a whole note, you'll kind of see it'll go something like this. And again, I'm just using my G chord, and I get like the first example is a whole note followed by a whole rest, followed by a whole note, followed by a whole rest. So it's really easy. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and run and 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and rest and 2, 3 and 4 and. So that's very basic. Now in the second example, we have a half rest, which looks very similar to a whole rest, except it sits on the line and faces up. So for example, we have, and that's going to be 2 beats, just like a half note. So the first measure of that example has a half rest, which is 1 and 2 and, followed by a couple of eighth note pairs, 3 and 4 and, followed by a half rest for 1 and 2 and, followed by quarter notes, 3 and 4 and, followed by a half note, 1 and 2 and then a rest for 3 and 4 and. Then we have a quarter note, 1 and, a half rest, 2 and 3 and a quarter note, 4 and. So all these things kind of get mixed together. Let me play it for you all the way through without stopping. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, one of the things that you kind of have to keep in mind is that it's sometimes difficult to keep that right arm moving while you're doing a rest. Not always, and most of the time, you can sort of do the rest and then get it back to going again. But even if I'm not moving it very much, you'll probably find that I still move even just a little bit, just to kind of keep that flow going the way it needs to. So let's look at the next example, where we're going to have a quarter rest, which I just call a squiggle because it just kind of looks squiggly. I don't really know what else to call it, and with some quarter notes. So the first measure is going to be 1 and is the rest, 2 and is the quarter note. I'm just going to relax my G chord, my left hand, and that'll kill it for 3 and then 4 and then the next measure 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and is the rest. The next measure 1 and then 2 and then another quarter rest, 3 and then a note, 4 and then 1 and for the rest, 2 and 3 and then a rest, 4 and. So let's put that all together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now when we get into an eighth note rest, it can be a little tricky. It's a little bit tough, obviously, to count that out. However, one thing I can tell you is that eighth note rests almost always happen as the first of a pair of eighth notes. It really doesn't make sense for them to happen at the second half of the beat. It'll happen once in a great while, but there are other ways to notate that using, for example, a staccato marking over a quarter note, which makes a little bit more sense, and it's a little bit easier to read. So typically when you see an eighth note rest, it's going to be on the front half of a beat. So if you look at kind of a reggae style example here, this is a big part of reggae music, is striking the only on the upbeats. So this next example, you'll see I start with a C, and I have 1 is the rest, and 2, and 3, and 4, and then I'm going to go to an E minor, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and A minor, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and then G, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. Now by itself that probably doesn't sound very exciting, but let's speed it up a little bit. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Let's do that one more time. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 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 3 and 4 and. Now I can tell you from experience that probably the biggest thing that I see with that last example is that it starts off on the and then morphs into the downbeats. So it starts off 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and pretty tunes into 1 and 2 and 3. So it's super, super important that you keep that count going and that your foot goes down when your arm goes down. I often make this joke that you should pretend there's a string that goes from your wrist to your foot. And so if your arm comes up, your foot goes up. And if your arm goes down, your foot can go down. But they can't ever go in reverse order. And in fact, in private lessons, I can actually, basically cover, I don't even have to look at the guitar. If I watch my student's foot, I can tell when they're just about to make a mistake. And it's amazing. This always works though. As soon as, if I see the foot going nice and even with the beat, as soon as I see the foot start to kind of flutter or not be sure, I know the mistake is about to happen, and then bang, there comes the mistake. So it's like clockwork. The whole body is part of the strumming process. So make sure that when you're doing that exercise or that example, that you are 1 and 2. Do that count out loud. Make sure that the arm is moving with the foot. Make sure that what you're saying matches with what your arm and your foot are doing. That's really, really important. Okay, so let's go on to the next example. It's unusual to use all kinds of rests like that throughout an entire tune, but it's very common to do it on, I'll say, those kind of turnaround sections again, where I'm about to either set up the end of the song or the end of a phrase coming into the next phrase or whatever. So if we look at example 3-5, you'll see that I've got the most popular strum in the world for 3 bars in a row, and then in bar 4 with the D chord, I have 1 and 2 is a rest, and 3 is a rest, and 4 and. Now you may hear a little bit of a slap, or you might hear my pick going across because, you know, I'm still trying to keep the motion going. So it's kind of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I'm kind of flopping my hand on there. So you might hear tapping on the guitar, you might hear pick against strings, and all of that is okay. So let's play this whole example. This is going to be 3-5 and a slow tempo. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and for the whole note there. Okay, so you could totally repeat those first 4 measures. You know, you could do that a bunch of times, and you basically got a song. So let me do it a little bit faster, and I'm going to go ahead and repeat those first 4 bars for you. I didn't write it that way, but I think it'll make perfect sense. So here we go. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, notice that, you know, I kind of slough the chord changes a little bit. When I've got that 8th note leading into the next chord, I'm definitely letting go and letting my left hand start to make that transition ahead of time. All right, so hopefully that makes sense to you. Now, I know this lesson was a little bit shorter. You know, the rests are not that complicated, but it's really important that you kind of get this idea down because these last 3 lessons have really laid the foundation for what's to come. So let's, I'm going to have you go work on these. I will see you in the next lesson. We're just going to go through quite a bit more examples, more strumming patterns to learn, you know, lengthen them out, make them a little bit cooler. So make sure you got those first 3 lessons down really well, and I'll see you in the next video.